Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Group of 78 webinar on conflict in Ethiopia and rising tensions in the Horn of Africa. My name is Roy Culpepper. I chair the Group of 78. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that the city of Ottawa, where I'm making these introductory remarks, is in the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. In Canada, Indigenous communities have, for many generations, stewarded the rivers, coasts, forests, and the land. We must learn from their example and their struggle for justice and respect their legacy. For almost 4 decades, the Group of 78 has promoted dialogue about a progressive Canadian foreign policy based on the principles of sustainable peace through common security, justice with equity, and survival of our planet in the face of modern human activity. Today, peace, justice, and survival are also sought by all Ethiopians. The purpose of this webinar is to deepen our understanding of the violence in different parts of Ethiopia, and particularly the war in the Tigray region. We hope this brief discussion will be informative, particularly for those who are not steeped in the rich history and the political and social complexities of Ethiopia, a populous nation of some 115 people. There has been intense debate surrounding the recent hostilities in Tigray, Ethiopia's northernmost state. Our aim is not to deliberate on who is right and who is wrong or to apportion blame for the violence. Rather, we want to focus on how Ethiopians can work together toward agreeing on pathways to sustainable peace. In addition to conflict resolution, substantial humanitarian assistance is urgently needed. 3 million people need food, and there are a large number of refugees. It is reported that 1.8 million people in Tigray were dependent on food aid even prior to the November 2020 hostilities, making the impact of the conflict even more severe. As this will also require the cooperation and support of Ethiopia's regional neighbors and leading world powers, it is fair to ask in this context whether Canada may also play a supportive role. To address these challenging issues, we are fortunate in being joined by 3 knowledgeable individuals who know about the Ethiopian crisis and who can help illuminate pathways to a sustainable and just peace in the region. I'll introduce them very briefly here. Fitz-Gerald is Professor of Political Science and Director of the Balsillie School of International Affairs in Waterloo. Worku Aberra is Professor and Chair of the Department of Economics at Dawson College in Montreal. And Samuel Getachew is an Ethiopian Canadian journalist based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. We shall proceed as follows. I shall pose a series of questions to the panelists. These will be broad and provide our speakers space to respond as they wish, and if they wish to comment on each other's responses as well. But we have asked them to be as concise as possible. After the last question, we shall turn to our audience who are invited to submit questions in writing to the Q&A, the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. I would like to inform people that the chat line is disabled as it is for all of the Group of 78's webinars so that we can concentrate on what's being said and spoken on screen by our panelists and on the Q&A questions that are submitted. Okay, so that being said, let's turn to our panel and the questions. So I have a series of questions that are broad enough to give our panelists some room to respond in the manner in which they wish. Starting with this one, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019, and barely a year later, Ethiopia was in the grip of a violent conflict in Tigray. Where do you locate the roots of this crisis in Ethiopia's recent history? And I'm going to ask you to begin with this one, if you will, please.
You've asked me, Roy.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation today. And maybe I could repeat some of your words, Roy, and just begin, I think, appropriately by acknowledging the impact that this conflict and other conflicts in Ethiopia is having on communities and, of course, the innocent victims of these conflicts. This is a real-time issue, and I think it's very important to pay due respect to this. So in terms of your question, Roy, I think we could go far back in time to the change of leadership of the EPRDF government in Ethiopia, but I think I'd prefer to pitch it as the roots being in a tale of miscalculations on both sides. The new government administration and the outgoing TPLF-dominated leadership. So miscalculation on the government's part that a cadre of very experienced, operationally competent security leaders, many of whom were retired either forcefully or voluntarily, a miscalculation that they would exit quietly and retire peacefully, knowing that their long-term visioned doctrine and ethnic federalist model was being dismantled. And the same way in which their consolidation could draw on a number of domestic and regional networks to build, in the end, an enormous security apparatus that went far beyond the constitutional limits of regional security architectures. And I should say that this was not just happening in the Tigray region. So there was an immediate conflict of interest here in the way these regional security architectures were developed, because if being accountable to regional presidents, if there was a difference of view between the regions and the center, then that loyalty and alliance would go in opposite directions, and you would have an instant risk of conflict. A second miscalculation, I think, once the Prime Minister had declared this peace dividend with Eritrea and traveled to Eritrea for a second time to broker a deal to give the land along the shared border back to Eritrea, that this would inflame wounds even more, especially based on the stormy relationship that the TPLF leadership had had with Eritrea in the past. And thirdly, really how much this became a very personal grudge against the Prime Minister as well. And then on the other hand, the TPLF perhaps miscalculated the readiness for the Prime Minister to completely abandon the model of ethnic federalism and the principal tenets of the developmental state economic model. I'm sure my colleague will speak more about that, both of which the former administration had become very, very wedded to for many years. Perhaps also underestimated how swiftly and determinedly the government would seek to address issues concerning corruption and the security sector's involvement in the economy, and announcements and subsequent implementation in 2020 of the change in currency. And this would have a huge impact on cash-based accumulated wealth. And lastly, I think there was a miscalculation towards the levels of intolerance that were developing across all the other regions in Ethiopia and society writ large about the perceived inaction of the Prime Minister and his administration in not enforcing the rule of law and holding those who had been issued with arrest warrants to account. So I think, in summary, a tale of miscalculations on both sides.
Thank you very much. Tale of miscalculations. Samuel, what is your take on this?
Thank you, Roy, Worku, and Anne, and Sarah for inviting me. I'd like to be the Pearsonian voice in this debate. I'm sorry if I become emotional at some point. I just came back from Tigray, having witnessed many thousands of people that are being impacted by this conflict. I grew up in Ottawa listening to Bryan Adams, Tragically Hip, Blue Rodeo. I went to the parliament debate. I was surprised to see a Western alienation politician, Preston Manning's debate, Lucien Bouchard, and I was shocked. That's when I knew what it meant to be Canadian. And then I started studying Canadian history on my own, and I discovered people like Stephen Lewis, who was a passionate Canadian, who contributed in terms of helping Ethiopia during the famine. Joe Clark being the Canadian foreign minister then, and the CBC, Brian Stewart, which I had a chance to successfully nominate for the Order of Ontario with my friend Stephen Paikin from TV Ontario. So I want Ethiopia to look ahead. There are many, many complex issues I failed to understand. I wasn't in Ethiopia during the TPLF government. I knew the TPLF government from far. I lived in Ottawa, I lived in Toronto. I had a good life. I loved Canadian politics. Some say more than it loved me. I was defeated as a candidate from Scarborough. But I came to Ethiopia in 2006 wanting to make a contribution to what was happening in Ethiopia. It wasn't perfect. Abiy Ahmed is not perfect. I was proud when he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2018, I believe. I stayed up all night to write an article for CNN. I was happy. I was excited. Ethiopia was beginning to be known as a country beyond famine, beyond starvation, war, conflict, and so on. So again, my time in Tigray was difficult. I saw women that are being raped, famine that's affecting thousands of people. So the whole point of, we can debate Ethiopian politics as much as we want, but we have to begin to understand there are people that are being impacted. And we just have to look ahead, and I'll speak on it more as we go on.
Thank you, Samuel, for that very passionate piece of background, both personally and politically. Worku, over to you.
Okay, all right, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Group 78 for inviting me to participate in the discussion. Going back to the question, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed won the Nobel Prize for initiating and signing the peace agreement. Obviously, it was also expected that he would promote peace, understanding, the respect of human rights, and democracy in Ethiopia. So the implied question then here is, how is it that this man of peace, this man who won the Nobel Peace Prize, is now engaged in an armed conflict with another political party? Now, I'll try to be as objective as I can. I'm not here to apportion blame, but I think we need to look at the facts. Without going too much back into history, we have to look at how the transition of power took place after Haile Mariam Desalegn resigned in February 2018. At that time, there was power struggle within the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary EPRDF, it's quite a mouthful, and the TPLF wanted someone from the south to replace Haile Mariam. Some members of the two largest ethnic groups, the Amharas and the Oromos, felt that it would be a better idea to have another person as opposed to this person who was nominated by the TPLF. So you can see right from the beginning that there was a power struggle and that the TPLF was not too excited about having Abiy Ahmed elected the chair of the EPRDF and the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. So once he became prime minister, you can see a certain degree of hostility, one of the miscalculations by the TPLF towards Abiy Ahmed. Just let me give you some examples. On June 23, 2018, there was an assassination attempt on the prime minister's life. A number of people died, many people were injured. The Ethiopian government alleges that the former head of national intelligence, Getachew, was responsible for the assassination attempt. When the police tried to arrest him, he fled into Mekelle. And when the police went there to serve him with a court warrant, the TPLF government wouldn't allow that to take place. So this was one. And then you have really a series of provocative actions, if you want to call it miscalculation, that the TPLF took. In September 2020, the TPLF held regional election contrary to the decision that was made by the Ethiopian parliament to postpone the election. So that was one provocation. At another time, when the central government was trying to move military equipment and personnel from Tigray, the TPLF took a very, very, very strong stand. And here's the statement. I'd like to read the statement that was issued by the TPLF. It says, leadership changes, command reorganization, and movement of troops and armaments are absolutely unacceptable and will never be implemented. So this is a regional government telling the federal government that it doesn't have the authority to move troops and equipment from Tigray to other places. So true to its word, when the federal government appointed a new commander for the Northern Command, the TPLF refused to let the person take his position and the man was forced to return to Addis Ababa on the same airplane. Right? And then, of course, obviously, we have the fact that on November the 3rd, the TPLF decided to attack the Northern Command. And here, the TPLF leadership is very, very clear. They argue that it was a necessary measure that they had to take. It was a defensive act that they took in order to, according to them, defend Tigray from the military attack from Abiy Ahmed. So in short, if you ask the question, what are the roots of the problem? In my opinion, it's very clear. The major root of the problem is a power struggle between the TPLF and the Abiy government, in which the TPLF tried to come back to power through an armed insurrection. Okay, thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you. I'm sure that we've just touched on some of the prime issues and challenges that confronted Ethiopia and Tigray in that region, and there's a lot more that could be said, but perhaps we should try and move on and talk about the role of the media. Both mainstream and social media have played an important role in understanding and perhaps misunderstanding of the conflict. And we're fortunate to have Samuel, who's from the media, with us. So perhaps I'll ask you, Samuel, to begin with this one.
Well, the local media, if you're reflecting on the Ethiopian media, it's a news. I used to work for one of the main papers in Ethiopia with low budget. We focus on Addis Ababa. We don't get to see many parts of Ethiopia unless we're in a position to pay for it. So we were not able to cover Ethiopia as expected. But through my assignment to the Globe and Mail in Canada, again, it's a dream to work with Jeffrey York from the Globe and Mail and other media. I've been able to travel to many parts of the country, trying to understand what it means to be Ethiopian. Beyond this conversation that goes on the social media, we all get all kinds of comments on a daily basis. There are some people that love what we do. There are some people that hate what we do. I try to take, again, I grew up in Ottawa watching Tom Green, for example. I learned how to balance the two, the serious part of Ethiopia and having fun while doing what I do, which is travel to many parts of the country and truly wanting to understand the way the CBC showed us how our Canadians lived in Yellowknife, for example, or BC. Many of us never got to travel to many parts of Canada, but I can tell you who the premiers are. When I was growing up, you can ask me the capital city of Manitoba or Saskatchewan or Nova Scotia, and it was a CBC that influenced me to want to be a journalist beyond the usual suspects, which is the Toronto Star, which gave me a chance to write for them through Sway magazine and so on. So, but in Ethiopia, it's different. It's the old way of how George Bush used to look at the world, which is you're either with us or against us. There's no middle ground in Ethiopian politics. Every time I tweet, for example, I get all kinds of comments. Some really love what I wrote. Some people just hate what I do. There's no compromise. But, through social media, I've been able to have conversations to many, many people. I've used it as networking with all kinds of people. And we try our best. I don't think the Ethiopian media has really captured the challenges of Ethiopia, the conversation that needs to take place through the media, the way the Globe and Mail covers Canada, for example, or the Toronto Star covers Ontario eloquently, or Toronto, the GTA. We're trying our best. I don't think we're succeeding only because we're underfunded. We're not given the tools that we need to really help Ethiopia understand each other instead of this endless conflict we're beginning to see. There are so many people dying in Ethiopia. Every time I wake up, I check with my colleagues at different media, including Reuters, and we compare notes on how many people have been killed on different regions. And it has gone for a long time. And again, we're trying our best. We're not, I don't think we're perfect. I don't think anyone expects us to be perfect. But again, I want to be able to contribute to Ethiopia. And I hope this hate mail, this hate that we see on social media will end, and try to understand, even if we disagree with the person, have the respect to have a conversation is something that's needed in Ethiopia, is missing at the moment.
Thank you, Samuel. Worku, sitting in Montreal and Dawson College and reading about Ethiopia on social media and the mainstream media, how do you see the role that's being played?
Yeah, I very much appreciate the sentiment that Samuel expressed, the frustration. But I have to say that I'm very, very disappointed with the media reports that I've been reading here in Montreal. I can say that clearly that the media in covering the crisis in Ethiopia, in Tigray, has committed a number of omissions as well as commission. So some of the obvious things that the media has not covered is while it has concentrated, and of course correctly, on the abuse of human rights in Tigray, the humanitarian crisis in Tigray, that's important. It needs to be covered, no question about that. But there are a number of areas where the media has really glossed over major issues. As I said, for example, it has not addressed the main cause of the crisis. So it has concentrated on the crisis alone. As I said before, it has also concentrated on the crimes committed, the human rights violations of the Tigray people by the Eritrean troops, the Ethiopian army, the Amhara the Amhara militia and the special forces. That's important. It needs to be covered. Very good. However, what I haven't noticed is a similar kind of coverage on the violations of human rights by the TPLF. For example, on November 9, 2020, Amnesty International reported that forces allied with the TPLF massacred around 500 people at a village called Maikadra. That was not covered by mainstream media. It was covered, it was somewhat lightly. And what was interesting was that the same story, after a few days later, changed direction and became somewhat distorted. I remember reading a piece from Associated Press that reversed the story, saying that the victims were Tigrayans and the perpetrators were Amhara Fanos. I mean, that is really a total distortion of what happened. So this is one example. Another example, as I said before, was the treatment of Ethiopian soldiers by the TPLF. When you listen to the stories, women soldiers, the abuse that they went through, a soldier who survived a killing by the TPLF, he tells the story of how the TPLF made the soldiers lie on the road and was running over these soldiers, killing them, and that he had to jump to save his life, in the process lost a leg. I have no reason to doubt the sincerity of that story. That kind of coverage we don't hear. To his credit, Reuters about just 2 months ago mentioned that story. And I think of other examples. Another problem that I see with mainstream media is the level of sensationalization, exaggeration. Even the well-known magazine, The Economist, had a headline saying that the Ethiopian government uses hunger to subdue the Tigrayan people. I mean, that's not acceptable. Any government, it doesn't matter which government it is, will try to win the people over. It will not try to subdue people by subjecting them to hunger and starvation. And its conflict, the conflict of the Ethiopian government, is not with the Tigrayan people, it's with the TPLF. So you have that kind of problem. Another prominent example to mention is an opinion piece written by Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times, a well-respected columnist. His column argues that the Biden administration must take punitive action against the Ethiopian government for the ethnic cleansing and genocide that it is committing in Tigray. One of his proof that genocide is taking place in Ethiopia is a figure. He looks at the number of people who have been killed, and he claims that 50,000 Tigrayans have been killed. Now, that number was a purely fabricated number by individuals belonging to a political party that supports the TPLF. So he knows very well that's where the number comes from. And yet, he uses that number as an example of how the Ethiopian government is committing ethnic cleansing and genocide. That's unacceptable. So you have this kind of distortion that's taking place within the media, this slanted and biased reporting that hasn't, in my opinion, contributed to an understanding of what's taking place in Ethiopia. Regarding social media, I really don't have much to say, except that the kind of problem that you see in Ethiopia, perhaps Getachew knows better than I do, is really exaggerated. There are individuals and groups that tend to incite deliberately ethnic hatred, ethnic animosity, even ethnic cleansing, and that's quite sad and should not be tolerated. Thank you, Roy.
Thank you, Worku. Anne, you have referred with some concern to the role of both social and mainstream media. Following the remarks of Worku and Samuel, I'd ask you, what can be done about this? You're muted.
Sorry about that. Let me try to not repeat anything my two co-panelists have said, but the media have a really important role to play here. And I'd actually put a pitch in for the local media in Ethiopia. I've worked in Ethiopia across all of the regions for many years, and the way in which the local media have come on has been leaps and bounds, especially as they were under very harsh restrictions in what they could write independently in the past. So I just want to note that for the record. All civil society organizations have an important role, and we, those of us who are academics and scholars in security sector reform, have pushed for civil society reform for a long time. And in this context, and building on what Worku said, we have encouraged more investigative research as opposed to sensationalized research. So, and sensationalized reporting, what this means in practice is you don't focus on the incident alone, but you look at the policies and the decision making, et cetera, and the discussions that led to what have become, in most cases, very tragic incidences. So we need to talk about the overlay of social media as well. And this overlay is very important for someone like me who studies conflict and security. This overlay offers public interpretations and also public reinforcements to messages, but also distortions and manipulations of the facts on the ground. And some of those narratives, based purely sometimes on the volume of Twitter followers, get socialized and socialized and socialized, and we're left in the end with an incredibly polarized narrative. Now, we've seen this before, the age of disinformation and information, and we've seen many ground-based insurgencies be reinforced by propaganda by different sides of the conflict. But in this case, social media, today's social media, adds a dangerous layer, and even journalists and analysts themselves are commenting on their own analysis, depending on what's happening on that particular day. And this is something that we haven't really seen in the past. But where the situation is not helped by the government, I have to say, has been, in my view, a pretty dismal approach to the strategic communications on conflict issues and fronting that effort on the ground. You know, for a country of 110 million people, over 110 million people, surely the government can put a team on the ground in Tigray, take on good practice from other military operations, and detach journalists to battalions and units of federal forces on the ground. So there's been a huge gap in communications and a dangerous dearth of evidence-based narratives from the ground. And the media, you know, I sympathize with the media that way in some cases with investigative reporting that they've had to deal with this. But equally, when an information landscape is so polarized, it's incumbent on anyone seeking to report credibly on this to use decent methods of data collection and employ methods such as representative sampling, triangulation, all of those things that our collective reporting integrity is based on. And some of the data collection methods being employed to generate reports has raised, quite understandably, some serious questions across the research communities.
Thank you. It's obvious we've got lots of work to do on making the media, both social and mainstream, much better, but we don't have to travel far outside or even outside North America to come to that conclusion. We've got a lot of work to do at home on these very same issues. So thank you, panelists, for that round. I'm going to shift the focus now from Ethiopia fair and square to the surrounding neighborhood and the global community as a whole. Let's start with neighboring countries. How do tensions with some of the neighboring tensions, particularly Egypt and Sudan, affect regional stability in the Horn of Africa? And you've written about this recently, so maybe I'll ask you to start, if you don't mind, on this one.
Okay, just by way of some introductory comments, I think we've definitely seen the development of much more bolstered alliance between Sudan and Egypt, and also with that some more hardened voices and bellicose behavior. And these are significant players for the Horn of Africa, especially with regards to future discussions on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. And the GERD dam impacts on vital interests of Ethiopia, vital national interests, and is so important for lifting millions out of poverty. It's interlinked with economic development in the future, education, and human development writ large in the future. So, a lot rests on the progressive success of this project. Many people have also personally invested in the project. So, there's dividends that the population itself is seeking from this. So a standoff between these three countries is highly undesirable and will lead to a fight to attract other riparian states to side with different lead players. And my own view is that these talks can be divided down, certainly into at least two areas. The first area concerns filling, and I think with the right experts involved, like meteorologists, climatologists, and others, some sense can be made about what would be a optimal approach to filling of the dam. And that could possibly be done on a tripartite basis. But issues concerning water sharing really need the other Nile riparian states at the table. All need to be involved in that. And, there are laws on transboundary water sharing and long established good practice in this area. And this cannot be so bespoke to the GERD, because there's other people around the world other countries that will want to build dams, others in Africa, other Nile riparian states. And so this needs to be a really reproducible solution in the end. So the role of Egypt and Sudan is very important. And I think if filling was focused on, it could be a face-saving diplomatic option for President El-Sisi to capitalize on.
You said there were three issues. Was there a third one that I missed?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Okay, never mind.
I won't take up time trying to review what I've said.
Right. Worku, you're an economist. So how do you come at the issue of regional tensions and instability, particularly around the GERD dam?
Okay. Regarding the dam, I don't think I have much to add to what Anna said. Definitely, the dam has very important implications for Ethiopia. The Ethiopian government estimates that it will generate around $1 billion in foreign exchange earnings. And considering that Ethiopia heavily depends on foreign aid for its budget, having that kind of foreign exchange earnings will definitely help it deal with its budget and economic development. At the same time, the amount of electricity generated by the dam is not just limited to exports, but it will also be used for economic transformation and development in Ethiopia. Therefore, that's quite important. At the same time, when you look at the project, it will benefit the Sudan as well as Egypt. And in fact, when you look at the position of the Sudan, up until there was a change in government, it was going along with the position taken by the Ethiopian government. Even when the question was raised at the Arab League, surprisingly, the Sudanese government sided with Ethiopia. I believe that was the only government that did not vote supporting the Egyptian position. So definitely, when you look at the dam, it has a very good integrative role in bringing a number of countries in the region, including Eritrea, Djibouti, Kenya, which will bode very well for economic integration. Therefore, it will have a very good positive impact. Now, to my understanding, the main point of dispute is Egypt and the Sudan wanting Ethiopia to guarantee a certain amount of water flowing into Egypt and the Sudan. And when you look at that demand, it's almost impossible for any government to guarantee the flow of water in the Nile, because that depends on the amount of rain that Ethiopia receives or the region receives. So when you look at the history of the Nile, well, there's going to be increases and decreases in the flow of water based on the rainfall. So for Ethiopia to guarantee a certain amount of water flowing into Egypt will be almost impossible, because Ethiopia cannot control the drought. So that, I think, is some of the outstanding issues regarding the GERD. But the crisis in Tigray has also brought another dimension to the problem. As is well known, the Sudan, taking advantage of the armed conflict in Tigray, has occupied the Al-Fashqa region in northwest Ethiopia. This was a region that was under Ethiopian administration. The Sudanese government maintains that this region was given to Ethiopia by al-Bashir as a gesture of his appreciation of the good work that the Ethiopian government did in bringing reconciliation between the Sudan and southern Sudan. So there is that conflict. It's there. And the Ethiopian government has refrained from taking action because given its involvement in Tigray, it's not in any position to have a war, a full-scale war with the Sudan. Neither is the Sudan ready. Now, regarding the current crisis and Egypt's position, well, definitely Egypt will try to use any leverage that it has in order to get some kind of concession from the Ethiopian government. And there have been reports, for example, that Egypt is building a base in southern Sudan, although the government there denies that there are any bases. At the same time, it has been reported in the media that Egypt is supplying arms to rebel groups in Benishangul and Walaga, hence contributing towards instability in Ethiopia. So to answer your question, Roy, how has the crisis contributed to the tension in the region? Yes, it has elevated the tension, no question about that. So that's regarding the Sudan and Egypt. On the other hand, when we will take into account the other countries, let's say Djibouti, Kenya, they have remained more or less neutral. In fact, have taken a position that this is purely an internal matter that should be left to the Ethiopian government. Okay, thank you, Roy.
Thank you, Worku. Samuel, have your journalistic investigations led you to look at or think about these regional issues?
You know, when I appeared on, I think, one of the shows on TRT or Al Jazeera, one of them, I was asked at the beginning of the conflict whether this was a regional conflict. It really is. I mean, we look at the Sudan, for example, where we have thousands of Ethiopians that have taken refuge. I grew up in an era where Ethiopia was giving thousands of Sudanese refugees a shelter. And let me reflect on the Renaissance Dam. Again, I'm trying to not blame anyone, but try to understand. So I think Ethiopians need a solution. We've been having these issues for a long time, and I'm trying to be, again, the Canadian voice, someone who can compromise and bring us as one people, because I still believe in, if I can rephrase what Clinton said, a place called hope, which is Ethiopia for many of us. And that's why I came to Ethiopia, to stay here and make a living with something, a profession that is becoming more dangerous by the day, not just in Ethiopia, but many parts of the world. But let's look at the Renaissance Dam, for instance. I remember when the debate was happening in 2011, I have to admit, I was one of those people who doubted it. I didn't think Ethiopia had the potential to build such a mega institution. Ethiopians contributed so much money. It did not come from EU or Canada or the US. It came from everyday Ethiopians. You know, as this conflict moves on, it concerns me if this Renaissance Dam, which you only have to go out of Addis Ababa to understand its impact on humans, its potential. Many parts of the country, Ethiopians are still living outside of the norm, no electricity, no basic support that they need, which we all believe this Renaissance Dam will really be the answer to the challenges we've been having in the country, not just in Addis Ababa, because we're all focused on Addis Ababa. As a local Ethiopian journalist, I'm forced to focus on the capital. Many of us write our stories from a five-star hotel, for example. We don't even get to travel outside of the city to understand what's happening outside of Addis Ababa, because most of the killings, most of the famine, most of the challenges are happening outside of the capital. But it's really touching on regional issues because, again, the Renaissance Dam to the average Ethiopian is so important. The US have been having this clownish president who really looked down on the ambition of Ethiopia to be self-sufficient. We have a chance in a new administration in Washington, D.C. to have someone who can really understand the impact of the Renaissance Dam, which is a made in Ethiopia solution to the kind of issues we've been having in the country. I have to extend this conversation and try to understand how Canada can make a contribution. We have an excellent, someone I grew up with, admiring from far, Bob Ray at the UN, for example, who is someone who is smart, gifted, someone who is supported not just by the NDP and his, recent friends, the Liberals, and even Conservatives, with an independent voice, a smart Rhodes Scholar voice that we really need to not only help Ethiopia, to bring the Canadian voice that Justin Trudeau talked about in 2005 to the mainstream. There is a leadership for Canada. For example, helping the Renaissance Dam, trying to have the world understand that Ethiopia no longer wants to be the aid-dependent nation that everyone looked down on. And someone who can understand the ambition of Ethiopia. So, I know I'm all over the place, but I see a Canadian leadership role in helping Ethiopia embrace an ambition of wanting to be self-sufficient, as well as really solving the conflicts, again, that's affecting so many people. Whether the people are from Tigray or Oromia or Amhara, it does not matter. People are dying in Ethiopia, and we need an international leadership to stop the kind of humanitarian crisis that's happening in Ethiopia, because we all want to see a kinder, passionate, and prosperous Ethiopia that I grew up with in Canada.
Thank you very much. We're starting to run out of time, but I would actually like to pose one more question before we go to the Q&A questions, which have come in. And that relates to beyond the regional tensions in the neighborhood with Sudan and Egypt, and no one mentioned Somalia, there are the global powers, and there's a certain amount of rivalry going on in Africa between the United States and China and to some extent Russia. To what extent are these global powers and actors having an influence on what is happening in Ethiopia? And in that context, picking up from what Samuel said, is there a specific role that Canada can play to bring about a sustainable peace in Ethiopia? And can I ask you to go first on this one?
Sure, thank you very much. I think there are some powers that have had a role to play, but I think we should recognize that there are also other powers that we've not heard or seen a great deal from. And I think this reflects the fact that our international peace and security toolbox really needs to be retooled. On one hand, we have these measures of expressions of consternation, condemnation, support. On the other side of the spectrum, we've got measures of more coercive measures like sanctions, intervention, etc. And we need some measures for the in-between as well. But let me say a few words perhaps on China and the US, because for me, they're the major players here. Let's remember what China's strategy in Africa is all about. This is the facilitation of its quest for economic supremacy and economic world dominance through its Belt and Road Initiative, but also different Belt and Road arteries as well, and meant to engender a strategic footprint in the countries through roads, rails, infrastructure, etc. Whereas China is often misunderstood to be pursuing these measures for the purposes of military expansionism. Remember, quests for economic supremacy really need relative peace. So I think China can often be misunderstood this way. But in terms of its economic objectives, reaching a net carbon zero by 2050 is very important to this. And China is by far ahead of the rest of the world on this. It's access to and consumption of green energy and information technology, metals and resources is a big part of this strategy. And the longer term partnerships in the Horn of Africa region are no doubt positioning China very well, especially in terms of access to these metals and resources across the Arabian Nubian Peninsula. But on the US, the issue of the US, through the Biden administration's new economic approach to national security, I believe that US-African policy in the future will be less about migration trends and defense industry and open shipping routes to more access to these minerals and resources and securing resilient supply chains. So it's lagging significantly behind China at the moment. I think its bargaining chip with African countries will probably be offers to locate secondary industry on the continent, something that China is less amenable to because its approach is to extract these resources and bring them back home to support its own industry. So the US is the one country that can make a difference here, but it needs good policies, evidence-based policies. It needs to step in the right direction. It needs to be a driver of stability and not a driver of instability, which would risk losing its preferred partnership status with the Horn of Africa countries. In terms of Canada, just a few last words on that. I think Canada's always been a big supporter of its multilateral partners and has and will continue to put money through the UN agencies and aid organizations. I think it can actually do more in terms of direct support to the ground. We have a feminist foreign policy here in Canada, so I think it's very well positioned to support victims of the conflict, especially women, girls, marginalized communities, provision of psychosocial support, et cetera, as part of the healing process. Women also have a very important role to play in peace building and supporting bottom-up approaches to dialogue. And let's not forget that Ethiopia has been governed for as long as history by ruling elites. So it's a very elite-heavy approach to governance. Let's get those voices heard from the ground as well and have mechanisms to do that, and mechanisms to understand what democratic approaches are really all about. We're a country committed to truth and fairness, and I think support for the establishment of conflict truce is going to be very important to the healing process. And over the longer term, I think related to the future of conflict more generally, I think Canada should really stand up in support of reforms to global internet governance, because we're seeing increasingly conflicts fought on the internet and on the ground.
Thank you. Worku, do you have any observations on the role of outside powers and the role of Canada for that matter?
Okay, thank you, Roy. Yes, definitely the major powers, whether it is the United States, China, or the EU, consider Ethiopia a strategic ally. Because of its size, Ethiopia is the second most populous country. It now has the largest economy in East Africa. And then obviously its proximity to the Red Sea, where you have about 10% of the world trade goes through. If you look at the oil imports going to Europe, 60% of goes through the Red Sea to Europe from the Middle East. And at the same time, Ethiopia has historically played an important role in peacekeeping in the region. Ethiopia has is participated in the United Nations peacekeeping in the Sudan, Southern Sudan, Somalia, and so on, as well as obviously the headquarters of the AU being located in Addis Ababa. So because of these reasons, the major powers are definitely interested in what's taking place in Ethiopia. Many of my Ethiopian friends are somewhat surprised at the strident position that the Biden administration has taken. And some people are concerned, or in fact even worried, that the Biden administration may impose economic sanction. Some may also think that perhaps the Biden administration may even take military action. I doubt it very much. I really doubt it very much that the administration will take such a severe action against Ethiopia because of, again, the strategic importance of Ethiopia. So there could be all kinds of reasons why the rhetoric has been somewhat elevated against Ethiopia by the Biden administration. But when it comes to taking serious measures, as I said, I have my doubts because of the importance of Ethiopia. One point that we need to mention is the role of middle powers in the region that has not been mentioned. For example, the United Arab Emirates is deeply involved in Ethiopia. It has provided financial aid to Ethiopia. When Ethiopia needed foreign exchange earnings after I came to power, the UAE committed itself to provide $3 billion, $1 billion of which was transferred immediately to the Central Bank of Ethiopia, the Bank of Ethiopia. So you can see the role that the UAE is playing by the fact that even some Western countries are now approaching the United Arab Emirates government to influence the Ethiopian government. Just yesterday, Biden had a telephone call with the leader of the UAE, again raising the question of Ethiopia with the United Arab Emirates government. So you have local actors like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and some experts also further north, Turkey playing a role in the region. Okay, so you have that. Now, what can Canada do? Well, Ethiopia can learn quite a lot from Canada. As you know very well, Canada went through the process of truth and reconciliation as a result of the residential schools. And there are a number of lessons that Ethiopia can learn from that experience, from the conclusion of that commission, and from the principles that was indicated from that exercise. So when you look at Ethiopia, Ethiopia needs to go through the process of peace, truth, and reconciliation as Canada has done. There have been historical injustices, grievances committed against certain ethnic groups in Ethiopia, and Canada can play a role in bringing groups together and trying to bring about peace and mutual respect. So that's one thing that Canada can do. Similarly, when you look at Canada's system, it's a federal system. It's a democratic federal system. And many political scientists argue that the Canadian system is one of the most decentralized federal systems. And in Ethiopia, there are many politicians who argue that given Ethiopia's cultural diversity, ethnic diversity, what Ethiopia needs is a decentralized federal system. So here we have Ethiopia that's regionally diversified, Canada that's regionally diversified, and both, at least in the case of Canada, we have a clearly established federal system. So the question that Ethiopia can learn from Canada is how will it be possible to have autonomy, self-rule, decentralized power, while at the same time maintaining a strong national unity government. So in that area as well, Ethiopia can learn quite a lot from Canada. And given the status that Canada enjoys, not only in Ethiopia, but in Africa, I think Canada can play a very constructive role in bringing about peace and stability and transition to democracy in Ethiopia. Thank you, Roy.
Thank you, Worku. I realize we're over our 1 hour initial time limits, but with the indulgence of the audience and the panelists, I ask that we go on for another 15 minutes. Is that okay with the panelists? Okay. So, Samuel, did you want to respond to this last, or the question that was just posed about the role of outside powers in Canada, before we go to one more question about the elections?
I mean, there's little to say than what has been said. But, Canada, while it's known for, feeding the poor, as they say in Ethiopia, I know Canada, beyond helping, famine victims. If you look at the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, that was created to mirror the Ontario Human Rights Commission in Toronto. If you look at the Ombudsman office in Ethiopia, that was created by Stephen Owen, a well-known Canadian MP from British Columbia. Even if you look at our Ethiopian tuber, was created by the Canadian Mint. So, it looks like a toonie, as you can see. I don't know if you can see it. But Canada is known to create a system in a country that has no system. If Ethiopia at best has broken systems. But Canada can help Ethiopia, mentor Ethiopia to create a system that can assist Ethiopians move forward. But again, among the two professors, I don't think I have anything to add to this.
Okay, thank you very much. So before we turn to the audience, let me just ask a question about an upcoming very significant event, that is the elections that are about to take place. Are these going to be a force for peace, or would they perversely might even lead to more instability? Anne, can you lead on this one?
Sure, thanks, Roy. And I can see some of the questions coming in from the audience on the upcoming elections. I think we're seeing calls from across different levels of political and civil society, even from the opposition parties, for the elections to move forward. And there was an update earlier on today that 34 million people have now registered for the election. And it's worth noting that that is more than the last federal election, that were registered for the last federal election. So with 4 to 5 weeks to go, these numbers are slowly increasing. I think Ethiopia, more than anything at the moment, needs to have its legitimacy set down, bolstered, reinforced, and depending on the outcome of the election, the country can then move forward, bring about a sense of calm, which will be more conducive to healing. For the healing, it's necessary to establish truth through credible and evidence-based investigations, for accountability to be upheld. But with that accountability also needs to be recognition that many people involved in violence on all sides will be perfectly honest and decent people who were not predisposed to violence in any way or crime, but who found themselves in particular circumstances. So I think this has implications for transitional and restorative justice and forgiveness. I think there's a lot of good scholars out there who've done some good work on constitutional reform as well. And I think this is absolutely necessary, including the complete dismantling of the current regional security sector. And, we can learn really good lessons from other case studies like Northern Ireland and the complete dismantling of the former police service there, and positive experiences from elsewhere. Most importantly, economic development is critical. One thing that we've learned from armed insurgencies elsewhere in the world is that they don't work in increasingly technological, sophisticated societies. There's too much through electronic surveillance and other technologies that identifies these threats before they hit national soil in some cases. So I would just say the elections are very important at the moment for legitimacy. There needs to be maximum participation and good accountability and observation.
Thank you. Samuel, what's your view on the upcoming elections?
I hope the election will be accepted by all sides. Whether it will be accepted or not is an open debate. But again, I am a Canadian. I watch it from afar. I can't participate or I can vote. But we want to be able to see an open democracy in Ethiopia. I mean, I don't want to be critical on any part. Again, I just came back from traveling from a very sad part of Ethiopia. So I hope the election will be accepted by all sides. If not, I hope Ethiopia will learn from it and move forward. The country has over 110 million people. It's an important nation within the region. It's a respected nation. And I hope, again, if Ethiopians don't have the open democracy that we've always wanted it to have, I hope it will be a learning experience for us to move forward and maybe have, future elections that are more open.
Thank you. Worku, last word to you. What are the prospects for the Ethiopian elections?
Okay, thank you, Roy. What I wish I had the crystal ball to say that, well, this is going to happen for sure, but it's difficult to tell what will happen. So it looks like the Prosperity Party has a good chance to form the next government. Although the support that the Prime Minister enjoyed in the beginning has eroded, has declined, particularly in the region of Amhara, because people felt that the Abiy government did not really respond to the killings and massacres of innocent Amharas in the region of Oromia and Benishangul. I believe that has cost him a lot of support in the region of Amhara. So there is possible that the Prosperity Party may not win the regional election. But for the federal election, I think the Abiy government has an excellent chance of forming the next government. So with that, it will have a certain degree of legitimacy to introduce certain changes that will make it conducive for peace and stability in Ethiopia. So it has definitely needs to introduce institutional changes. For example, as Anne was mentioning, one of the things that the government has to look into is the setup of the police force and the so-called special forces. When you look at the regional forces today, they're composed entirely of the dominant ethnic group. Therefore, when minorities are attacked, when their properties are looted, when their businesses are burned down, the police quite often stand by or occasionally even participate in the criminal acts. So that needs to change. There has to be a provision requiring that minorities be represented in the police force. That needs to be done. Second, as Anne pointed out, these are so-called special forces that the regions have under the command of the ethnic political parties is, in my opinion, a recipe for civil war. They're well-armed, they're well-trained, and they're under the control of ethnic political parties. Unless they're dismantled and their members join either the Ethiopian National Defense Force or the Ethiopian, the federal police force, that will really create a lot of danger for peace and stability in Ethiopia. Unless they are dismantled, Ethiopia will become another Lebanon where you will not have a strong government. So that is another institutional change that the government must implement. Second, the anti-hate law in Ethiopia needs to be either vigorously applied, or maybe the law needs to be looked into and make it quite difficult for people to incite hatred, ethnic conflict, and ethnic cleansing. Right now, we have social media and many channels, YouTube channels, that are promoting ethnic hatred, hate speech. So these are some of the examples. And obviously, as was mentioned earlier, youth unemployment is very, very high. Ethiopia is a youthful country. We're talking about close to 70% of the population being under 30. And therefore, the youth unemployment needs to be addressed so that they will be steered away from violence into something constructive. So in Ethiopia, I'm quite, I can say that the prospects for peace are quite good, whereas in the region of Tigray, I think it will take a long time to have peace and stability. Okay, thank you. I'll stop here, Roy.
Okay, turning very briefly to our list of questions, we have a few in the queue. Let me start with this one. Cessation of hostilities and declarations of a declaration of principles are the first step to a negotiated political settlement. What do you see as a framework for such a declaration of principles? Who'd like to pick up on that one?
You mean a declaration of principles around a ceasefire? Because that's usually, there's a post cessation of conflict.
I'll let you interpret it as you wish.
I mean, I guess what we're waiting for is to see the outcome of the military element of the intervention in Tigray. I believe I'm correct in saying that the law enforcement operation has officially ended, and the leads have been handed over to local provisional authorities, but there are still military operations going on in some pockets. And we know less about the outcome of those operations. So whether or not we see prolonged insurgency activity that requires a cessation of hostilities framework agreement, or whether this activity reaches an end and healing starts and dialogue starts and forgiveness and reconciliation and all those things that we've been talking about, it's still a watch this space, I think.
Mm-hmm. Worku, Sam, do you want to weigh in on this?
This is really beyond my area, the idea of a declaration of principle. At least what I can say is that as someone who is outside the field of negotiation, and I would argue that at least all political parties should accept the principle that any resolution, any misunderstanding should be resolved peacefully and resort to arms. I think that's quite important. So, we can start with that. And at the same time, as we mentioned earlier, there is a need for reconciliation, a national reconciliation. So the commission that was established by the government, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, needs to work. The Abiy government has taken the correct step, but as far as I know, nothing has been done so far. So that is one area to consider as well. The other thing that Ethiopia can also exploit is the fact that in all of the Ethiopian ethnic groups, among all the Ethiopian ethnic groups, there are different ways of settling dispute. There are different dispute settlement mechanisms so that you can have restorative justice. Again, perhaps as has been attempted a few times, for example, involving religious leaders, elders to mediate between political parties, and political parties willing to accept the recommendations of these groups is essential. I remember at one point, a group of elders and religious leaders went to Mekelle to negotiate between the TPLF and the federal government. And the answer that they received was that this is a political issue and political issues must be resolved politically. I don't think that's a healthy attitude. Therefore, there is a role that traditional leaders, church religious leaders, and elders can play, exploiting the rich traditional ways of resolving mechanisms. Other than that, as I said, this is a little bit outside my field. I can't say very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Worku. Samuel, did you want to weigh in on this?
No.
Okay. Here are questions that come out of the remarks made about the role of the global powers. What concerns do people have about Jeffrey Feltman, who is very pro-TPLF, Jeffrey Feltman being the U.S. envoy to the Horn of Africa? Any thoughts on that?
I think in my view, he said some very unfortunate remarks that were captured on video and that were circulated quite widely, as everything is these days, before he even got to the ground in Ethiopia. Interpret that as you wish, but I felt it was unfortunate. I think that the US can be part of the solution instead of being part of the agitation. And so the fact that Jeffrey Feltman is a serious player in the US, they're appointing a serious player to this role, as they did provisionally before him through Chris Coons. So let's hope that their contribution is constructive and that there is some constructive weight that comes with that serious appointment.
Okay. Worku?
I don't know the gentleman, but I can argue that it doesn't matter what kind of personality, what kind of individual this gentleman is. He can only reflect policies that further the strategic interests of the United States. He will not do anything that will jeopardize American interests in the region. So as was stated earlier, the United States has vested interest in maintaining peace and stability in Ethiopia. Anything that it does that leads to instability or the fragmentation of Ethiopia will be disastrous, not just for the region, but also for the United States as well as the West. Therefore, I doubt it very much, regardless of whatever statement that this gentleman may have made, that there's going to be a radical change towards Ethiopia. As I was saying earlier, the Biden administration has taken a strong position against Ethiopia, and there are very good reasons to explain that. First of all, President Biden is trying to reverse the decline in American global influence over the last 20 years. That global decline has been exacerbated by the Trump administration over the last 4 years. The fact that Trump took the United States out of the WHO, out of the Paris climate agreement. And then, of course, his unflattering remark about Africans did not help. So Biden is trying to revive the decline in American influence by making Ethiopia an example of how his administration will stand for democracy, for human rights, and for freedom. I believe most of it is really rhetoric. I don't think it's going to go beyond that. The second explanation as to why the Biden administration has taken such a strong stand against Ethiopia is because currently there are quite a few individuals that were former officials of the Obama administration, including Susan Rice, including Gail Smith, who had been involved with the TPLF since the 1980s. And then there is Sherman. So these are individuals who have had positive, sympathetic attitude towards the leadership of the TPLF. Susan writes in her eulogy to at the death of Meles Zenawi, she praised him as the great leader and the father of Ethiopia, New Ethiopia. I mean, a characterization that most Ethiopians will disagree with. So there is that influence coming from former Obama officials influencing the Biden administration's position on Ethiopia. So given all of this, however, as I said before, as a result of its own strategic interest, I don't think that the US administration, regardless of the person who is leading its involvement in Africa, will take a radical position against Ethiopia.
Thank you, Worku. Samuel, you still report for CNN or American networks. Do you have views?
I don't report for CNN, but I do report for other news outlets, including TRT, Al Jazeera, and so on, and the Globe and Mail in Canada. I don't know Jeffrey that well. The new administration is trying to make an impression, as Worku said. By any imagination, it's a new administration that's much better than the Trump administration of the past. I think we have to give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, we shouldn't make a determination based on one single statement that may have been made, but we have to give them, I think, the space to make a contribution and maybe judge them in a year or two. I think the administration is bringing a new perspective. It's no longer rude or has misgivings about Africa, the continent, or the Africans, the people. But I think we have to wait and see the outcome before we make a determination based on one statement or a bunch of statements. I mean, we have to base our assessment, I think, the work that they plan to do within the continent as well as within Ethiopia.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to pick up on one more question, and then I think we should adjourn because we're getting well over time now. This question, can you think of any early signals to keep an eye on that might indicate further escalation of any political tensions being felt or experienced in the other regions in Ethiopia, potentially piggybacking on the pressures of crisis in the Tigray region? I don't think anyone spoke to this issue during our discussion.
Roy, I'm sorry, I have to go, but I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. I have to travel outside of Ethiopia to Afar, and I just want to say thank you. It's good that we're having this kind of conversation. It reminds me of the agenda in Toronto. I used to watch at 8 p.m. every night, and I just want to say thank you, but I'm sorry, I have to go.
Fine,
My
understood.
flight is waiting for me, but thank you
so much for
thank you for facilitating this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Anne or Worku, on other regional tensions within Ethiopia?
Well, I think showing a commitment to the dialogue across the country is essential to this, and a grassroots, bottom-up approach to that dialogue, as well as the elite-based bottom-down approach or top-down approach to the dialogue. Groups coming together, as we're seeing more of, in coalition, no matter who they support and who they don't support, but realizing that the future of the country is in a very precarious state at the moment, and encouraging that coming together across all walks of society.
Okay, thank you. Worku?
Yes, it's quite likely that there could be some antagonism, some conflict. We have to keep in mind that when the EPRDF was in power, it used two mechanisms to retain its stay in power. One was outright repressive measures, and the other was ethnic divisiveness. And ethnic politics has been really quite predominant in Ethiopian politics for the last 27 years. So as a result of that emphasis on ethnicity, you will see occasionally clashes between different ethnic groups. Mostly, although it's kind of presented in the media as communal fights and inter-ethnic fights, most of the attack takes place against minorities by organized political groups. What's really uplifting and heartening is that when you look at ordinary people, whether it is the Amharas, the Oromos, the Tigrayans, or the Somalis, they get along with each other very, very well. And that's quite encouraging, because it says that in the long run, Ethiopia has a good chance of maintaining peace, mutual respect, understanding, and so on. So political actors, or ethnic entrepreneurs, as the literature calls them, have exploited past grievances for political purposes. So now one of the concerns that people had was that the conflict in Tigray could expand in the rest of Ethiopia. It could engulf Ethiopia and even the region. That hasn't happened yet. And if we were to listen to what the Prime Minister said in his address to Parliament on November 30th, he said that in Ethiopia, over the last 2-3 years, there were about 130 violent incidents, and in all of those incidents, the TPLF was directly involved. I mean, this is his statement. Whether that's true or not can be verified by independent investigation. So if that is indeed the case, then now that the TPLF has been militarily weakened and its network has been more or less dismantled, it's quite unlikely that you'll see the crisis in Tigray expanding in the rest of Ethiopia. However, it doesn't mean that, as I said before, ethnic entrepreneurs, political groups that have their political objective will not exploit ethnic differences for political purposes. So although the chances of widespread civil war in Ethiopia are low, we can't rule out the possibility of skirmishes here and there from time to time.
Okay, I'm going to have to wind things up. We're almost half an hour overtime now. We've had a long and rich discussion. I think in many areas we've barely scratched the surface. Much of what's being said suggests to me that sustainable peace is really a process. It's not a product. It's something that requires continual work and upkeep and maintenance. And therefore the governance mechanisms are essentially are crucially important, and in that regard, I think Anne and others have been right to suggest that Canada, with its experience in the Canadian Federation and with Canadian issues, may have something to contribute to the Ethiopian discourse. At least it can certainly hope to offer those kinds of sources of aid and support. To those who have submitted questions, there's been a numerous questions that have been submitted. Thank you. I'm sorry that we didn't have time to get to them all. I'd like to thank all of our audience for participating and persevering with us. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers. Samuel's left us already, but Anne Fitz-Gerald and Worku Aberra for taking time to join us and enlightening us on the complexities and the challenges, as well as the opportunities that face Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa. Finally, before adjourning, I'd like to thank very much our Executive Secretary, Sarah Bowles, who's been sitting in the control room, helping to make all of this work as well as it did. So, thank you, everyone, once again. Keep healthy, stay well, and good luck in your endeavors.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you. Bye, Anne. Nice meeting you. Take care.
Bye. Bye, Worku. Bye, Roy.